500 years ago, a traveler from Samarkand, the great Abd al-Razak, looked at a map and said, if the world were a ring, Hormuz would be its jewel. He was describing a city so rich, so central to global trade, that it outshone everything around it. Today, that jewel is more like a garrote. This 33-kilometer strip of water is the single most important on-off switch for modern civilization. 20 million barrels of oil. Every single day. A disruption here doesn't just cause a bump in the market. It bypasses every standard economic model. Economists can predict supply shocks, demand fluctuations, even wars. But a sudden closure of Hormuz? That throws the entire system into chaos. No model can account for the panic, the hoarding, the suspension of trust. And if that closure becomes complete, if the strait actually shuts down, analysts warn that oil prices could skyrocket past $200 a barrel. Not 150. Past 200. That's not inflation. That's cardiac arrest for the global economy. But here's the secret the news won't tell you: we've been fighting over this exact same puddle of water for 2,400 years. The ships change. The missiles get smarter. But the game? The game is ancient. Welcome to the anatomy of the world's most enduring geopolitical choke point. This is Hormuz. 20 million barrels of oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That's more than the daily consumption of Japan, Germany, France, and Italy combined. Plus, 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas. Think about that. Every time you turn on a light, fill up your gas tank, or order something online, there's a good chance those energy molecules passed through this narrow strip of water. A disruption here doesn't just cause a bump in the market. It bypasses every standard economic model. Supply shocks can be predicted. Demand fluctuations can be managed. Even wars have mathematical models. But a sudden closure of Hormuz? That throws the entire system into chaos. No model can account for the panic, the hoarding, the suspension of trust. And if that closure becomes complete, analysts warn that oil prices could skyrocket past $200 a barrel. That makes this 33-kilometer wide strait the most sensitive valve on the entire planet. Hormuz wasn't always a choke point. It wasn't even a strait. It started as a city on solid ground. Phase 1, the mainland port, 325 BC. Picture it, the Minab River, ships at anchor, and standing on the shore, Nearchus, the admiral of Alexander the Great himself. He knew this place as Hormozia. A trading post. A gateway. Nothing more. For over 1,000 years, it stayed that way. Then the Mongols came. Their horsemen didn't just conquer, they annihilated. Whole cities turned to ash. So the people of Hormuz made a choice that defied logic. Phase 2, the tactical retreat, 1300 AD. A ruler named Baha al-Din Ayaz did something desperate. He didn't build higher walls. He didn't dig deeper moats. He told his people, leave. Leave the land behind. They packed everything onto boats and sailed away from the mainland. They abandoned their farms, their wells, their ancestors' graves, all to escape the Mongol hordes. Phase 3, the island fortress. They settled on a barren, salt-crusted rock called Jaran. No fresh water. No soil for crops. Just heat, wind, and the sea. But here's the genius of their madness. By retreating from the land, they seized absolute control over the water. Every ship that wanted to pass had to come to them. They traded agriculture for maritime supremacy. Vulnerability became power. Isolation became wealth. And Hormuz transformed itself from a frightened town into the hub of absolute free trade. That's the foundation. Now let me show you what they built. So what did they build on that barren rock? Nothing less than the most dazzling trading hub the world had ever seen. By the time the great traveler Ibn Battuta arrived in 1377, Hormuz had become something extraordinary. He called it the dual city, a single heartbeat pulsing in two places at once. Markets on the coast. Markets on the island. Both operating simultaneously, neither ever sleeping. Ships would dock at midnight, and merchants would haggle by torchlight. Cargo was loaded at dawn, and by noon, those goods were already sailing toward India or Africa or China. The city didn't pause. Not for prayer, not for feast, not for war. But here's what made Hormuz truly remarkable. It wasn't just a market, it was a sanctuary. In an age of religious wars and sectarian bloodshed, Hormuz opened its gates to everyone. Muslims, Hindus, Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, all trading side by side. Dozens of languages echoed through its bazaars. Gujarati, Arabic, Persian, Malay, Tamil, Italian. No one asked about your faith. No one cared about your tribe. They only asked, what do you have to sell? That kind of tolerance wasn't just idealism. It was good business. When you welcome everyone, everyone comes to you. And what did they trade? Everything. But three treasures stood above the rest. First, pearls. The Gulf produced the most luminous pearls on earth, and Hormuz had an absolute monopoly on them. No pearl left the region without passing through Hormuz. Second, Arabian horses. Thousands of them, shipped across the sea to India, where they were worth more than gold. Third, Asian silk and Indian spices, flowing from the east to the markets of Europe and back again. Hormuz wasn't just a stop on the trade route. It was the hub, the place where the world's wealth converged, changed hands, and continued its journey. The jewel in the ring of global commerce. But a jewel that bright attracts thieves. And in 1507, the first global superplanet decided they wanted it for themselves. In 1507, the predator arrived. The Portuguese. Their motive was twofold, and both motives were absolute. First, the mercantile objective. They wanted to monopolize the spice trade, to choke every competing route, to own the flow of wealth from the east. Second, the religious objective. Their ships carried explicit orders, Deus Vult, God wills it, the same crusader battle cry that had echoed through the conquest of Jerusalem. Their mission was not just to trade, but to destroy Islamic dominance in the Indian Ocean. This was not economics. This was holy war on water. The fleet that appeared off the coast of Hormuz was small but brutally efficient. 7 advanced warships, state-of-the-art floating fortresses. 1,500 Portuguese soldiers, hardened veterans of African and Indian campaigns. Plus 700 Indian mercenaries. A highly asymmetrical force, designed not for conquest of land but for strangulation of sea. They didn't need to invade the island. They just needed to control the water around it. Admiral Afonso de Albuquerque didn't come to negotiate. He came with cannons. The naval bombardment was brutal and swift. Stone walls that had protected Hormuz for centuries crumbled under Portuguese fire. Ships in the harbor were sunk or captured. The local king, facing annihilation, was forced to submit. And just like that, the jewel of world trade became a colony. For the next 120 years, over a century, the Portuguese held an iron grip over the Strait of Hormuz. They taxed every ship. They controlled every passage. They turned the world's freest trading hub into a fortress prison. But holding power is not the same as keeping it. And the Portuguese would soon learn that lesson the hard way. The Portuguese didn't just bomb Hormuz and hope for the best. They built a system, a brutal, elegant machine of domination that spanned the entire Indian Ocean. At its heart was a simple idea: you don't need to control every port. You just need to control the choke points. Their global macro map had 3 pillars. 3 fortresses. 3 keys to the world's wealth. Goa, on the western coast of India, the gateway to the subcontinent's riches. Malacca, in modern-day Malaysia, the choke point between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. And Hormuz, the throat of the Persian Gulf. Hold these 3, and you hold the entire maritime Silk Road. Let one fall, and the whole system crumbles. Inside Hormuz, the Portuguese built a 3-part mechanism of control. First, the fortress system. Imposing, impenetrable stone castles constructed directly on the most strategic maritime choke points. Cannons pointed at every approaching ship. Sailors who tried to bypass them were blown out of the water. The message was clear: you do not pass unless we allow it. Second, the pass system. Local merchants, Iranian, Arab, Indian, were forced to purchase Portuguese safe conduct passes just to navigate their own waters. Imagine that. You're a trader born on these shores, your family has sailed these waters for generations, and now you have to pay a European invader for permission to sail past your own coastline. It was humiliating. It was expensive. And it was ruthlessly enforced. Third, the puppet monarchy. The Portuguese kept the local kings and viziers in place, but only as tax collectors. They let them sit on their thrones. Let them issue decrees. Let them feel like rulers. But every coin collected from merchants, every tax imposed on trade, flowed upward into Portuguese coffers. The puppet kings absorbed the anger of the people, buffering internal rebellion, while the Portuguese extracted the real wealth. It was brilliant. It was brutal. And for 120 years, it worked. But no system is unbreakable. And the people of Hormuz were already looking for allies to help them shatter it. After 120 years of Portuguese domination, the people of Hormuz had endured enough. But the Portuguese weren't easy to dislodge. Their fortress system was still imposing. Their maritime dominance still formidable. But cracks had started to appear. Their supply lines were overstretched. Their allies were restless. The once iron grip was now fractured and vulnerable. The question was, who would strike the first blow? On the Persian mainland, Shah Abbas I of the Safavid Empire had a vision. He wanted regional sovereignty. He wanted to restore Persian control over the Gulf. He wanted the Portuguese gone. But he had a massive problem: he had no navy. His land forces were among the most powerful in the world, skilled, disciplined, and loyal. But on the water, he was helpless. The Portuguese ships ruled the waves, and without naval power, Hormuz remained beyond his reach. So the Shah did something clever. He found a partner. The British East India Company, a rising power with cutting-edge ships and a hunger for commercial access, was eager to weaken Portuguese dominance. They had the one thing the Shah lacked: heavy naval bombardment capability. Warships with cannons that could crack Portuguese stone walls. The deal was simple. The British would provide the ships and the firepower. The Safavids would provide the troops and the siege. Together, they would break the Portuguese sea walls. The siege began. For 10 grueling weeks, British cannons pounded the fortress while Safavid soldiers tightened the noose on land. The Portuguese fought desperately, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from reinforcements. Finally, the fortress fell. The Portuguese were expelled after more than a century of domination. But here's the twist: the British didn't free Hormuz. They just replaced one master with another. The trading center was forcibly moved from the island back to the mainland, to a port called Bandar Abbas, where the British could control it more easily. The Portuguese were gone. But the struggle for Hormuz was far from over. Fast forward 2 centuries. The Portuguese were gone. The Safavids had faded. But a new power had risen on the Arab coast, the Qawasim. Based in Ras Al Khaimah and Sharjah, they built something the region hadn't seen in generations, a sovereign naval force to rival the Europeans. At its peak, the Qawasim controlled a massive fleet of 300 ships and 8,000 highly trained fighters. These weren't pirates. These were organized naval powers who understood the value of the strait. And they started doing exactly what the Portuguese had done before them. They imposed strict transit tolls on European merchant ships passing through the strait. To the Qawasim, this was simple sovereignty. To the British, it was an intolerable challenge. The British Empire, now the world's dominant naval power, could not accept a local force dictating terms on a waterway they considered vital to their Indian Ocean trade. So they did what empires always do when they need to justify intervention. They rebranded the Qawasim. Strategically, systematically, they labeled them pirates. It was a narrative designed to strip the Qawasim of their legitimacy. Not sovereign rulers defending their waters, but outlaws threatening civilized commerce. And once the label stuck, the moral and legal justification for imperial intervention was complete. Then came the hammer. The British launched devastating, unilateral naval campaigns against the Qawasim. First in 1809, then again in 1819. The assault on Ras Al Khaimah was brutal, warships bombarded the coastline, hundreds of Qawasim ships were burned, and the capital was reduced to rubble. The message was clear: there is no room for rival naval powers in British waters. The result was the General Maritime Treaty of 1820. The Qawasim were forced to sign away their naval power. And in their place, the British created the Trucial States, a collection of sheikdoms that would remain under British protection for the next century and a half. These Trucial States would eventually, in 1971, become the United Arab Emirates. The geography of the strait hadn't changed. The players had. But the game remained exactly the same. Now let's put it all side by side. 3 empires. 3 eras. 1 choke point. And the patterns are impossible to ignore. First, the Portuguese, 16th century. Their primary export was spices and silk, the luxury goods that made the Eastern trade so valuable. Their mechanism of control was the fortress system, stone castles, cannons, and brute force. Their stated justification: religious war. Deus Vult. They claimed a divine mandate to destroy Islamic dominance in the Indian Ocean. Their ultimate vulnerability: overextended supply lines. They were too far from home, too thin on the ground, and eventually, they broke. Second, the British, 19th and early 20th centuries. Their primary export shifted from spices to pearls and trade routes. Control of the Gulf's pearling industry was massively profitable, but the real prize was commanding the sea lanes to India. Their mechanism of control was gunboat diplomacy and treaties, threats and papers, cannons and contracts. Their stated justification: suppressing piracy and ensuring free trade. A narrative that always seemed to benefit London more than the locals. Their ultimate vulnerability: the rise of hydrocarbons. Oil and gas would soon dwarf the value of pearls and trade routes, and power would shift to whoever controlled the energy. Third, the modern era, dominated by the United States and its allies. The primary export is crude oil and liquefied natural gas, the lifeblood of the global industrial economy. The mechanism of control is the aircraft carrier strike group, the most powerful warships ever built, floating cities of steel and firepower. The stated justification: global economic security and freedom of navigation. Protect the flow of oil. Keep the world's economies running. And the ultimate vulnerability? Asymmetric warfare. Drones that cost $20,000 can threaten a billion-dollar carrier. Mines that can be scattered from a small boat can close the strait for weeks. The technology changes, from smoothbore cannons to hypersonic missiles. The justifications shift, from Deus Vult to free trade to global security. But the objective is identical: control the flow of wealth through the world's most sensitive throat. And the lesson from all three empires is the same: you can hold a choke point. You can blockade it. You can bomb it. But you cannot hold it forever against the will of the people who live on its shores. Then came the moment that changed everything. Not a battle. Not a siege. A discovery. In 1908, in the rugged hills of southwestern Iran, at a place called Masjed Soliman, they struck oil. The first massive commercial find in the Middle East. And the world would never be the same. Up until that moment, Hormuz had been about trade, spices, silk, pearls, horses. Valuable, yes. But not existential. After 1908, everything changed. The Persian Gulf became the world's gas station. The Strait of Hormuz became the throat through which the industrial age would be fed. More strikes followed. Iraq in 1927. Bahrain in 1932. Saudi Arabia and Kuwait in 1938. Qatar in 1940. The Gulf was sitting on more than half of the world's proven oil reserves. And all of it, every barrel, every tanker, every drop, had to pass through this 33-kilometer-wide strip of water. The paradigm shift was absolute. Control of the strait was no longer about taxing passing merchants. It was about guaranteeing the physical lifeblood of the entire industrial world. If Hormuz closes, the lights don't dim in Tokyo, London, and New York. They go out. Entire economies would freeze. Wars have been fought over less. And everyone knew it. The British, who had dominated the Gulf for over a century, suddenly found themselves guarding something far more valuable than trade routes. The Americans, emerging as the world's new superpower, saw Hormuz as a strategic necessity, not an option. And the Iranians, sitting on the shores of the strait, realized they held a weapon more powerful than any army. The jewel of the world had become its jugular. And the struggle for control was about to enter its most dangerous chapter yet. Fast forward to the 1980s. The Iran-Iraq War was raging on land, but it didn't stay there. It bled into the sea. What became known as the Tanker War turned the Strait of Hormuz into a shooting gallery. And the world held its breath. The escalation was gradual at first. Then it became a flood. Iraq, desperate to cut Iran's economic lifeline, began targeting Iranian oil tankers and the terminals that loaded them. Iran struck back, not just at Iraqi ships, but at any tanker belonging to nations that supported Iraq, especially Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Soon, neutral ships were being hit. The rules of engagement blurred. And the strait became a battlefield. The numbers are staggering. Over the course of the tanker war, the two sides executed more than 450 attacks on commercial shipping. 283 Iraqi attacks. 168 Iranian attacks. Oil tankers flying the flags of a dozen nations were hit by missiles, mines, and gunfire. Crews were killed. Ships were abandoned. The world's oil supply was being strangled in real time. At the peak of the crisis, Kuwait asked for help. The United States responded by reflagging Kuwaiti tankers, putting American flags on them and providing naval escorts through the strait. Operation Earnest Will was the largest naval convoy operation since World War II. American warships patrolled the Gulf, hunted mines, and escorted tanker after tanker through the danger zone. But the danger didn't disappear. In 1987, an Iraqi missile struck the USS Stark, an American frigate, killing 37 sailors. Iraq claimed it was a mistake. The damage was done. Then, in 1988, the USS Vincennes shot down Iran Air Flight 655, killing all 290 civilians on board, a tragedy that still echoes today. By the end of the tanker war, the Strait of Hormuz had proved its deadliest lesson: it doesn't take a full closure to disrupt the global economy. Just the threat of closure, just the chaos of sustained attacks, just the uncertainty of sailing through a war zone, that was enough to send insurance premiums skyrocketing and oil prices spiking. The strait had become what it remains today, the world's most sensitive trigger. Today, the stone fortresses of the Portuguese are gone. Replaced by something far more sophisticated, and far more terrifying. A modern blockade architecture designed not just to control the strait, but to make any attempt to use it a nightmare. On one side of the water, the U.S. Fifth Fleet, based just across the Gulf in Bahrain. Aircraft carriers. Destroyers. Submarines. The most powerful naval force ever assembled. Their mission: keep the strait open, protect the flow of oil, and deter any aggression. On paper, it's overwhelming. But paper doesn't sail through Hormuz. And the other side has had decades to prepare. Iran has built what strategists call a layer defense, a web of fear designed not to defeat the U.S. Navy in a conventional battle, but to make the strait so dangerous that no one would dare enter. First, the missile batteries. Anti-ship missiles deployed along the coast, on small islands, and hidden in the mountains. They can reach any vessel in the strait within minutes. Second, the small attack boats. Hundreds of them, fast, agile, hard to target. Swarm tactics that can overwhelm even the most advanced warship. Third, the mines. The most terrifying weapon of all. Silent. Invisible. A single mine, undetected on the seabed, can close the strait for weeks. No captain wants to risk his ship, or his crew, on waters that might be seeded with explosives. And then there are the drones. Cheap, expendable, and precise. A $20,000 drone can threaten a billion-dollar destroyer. A swarm of them can paralyze a convoy. The Portuguese built stone walls. The Iranians have built a psychological blockade. And the math is brutal: closing the strait is cheap and asymmetrical. Keeping it open is expensive, exhausting, and dangerous. The Portuguese learned that lesson after 120 years. The British learned it after a century. The question now is, how long before President Trump and the American leadership learn it too? 2,400 years. Alexander's admiral anchored here. The Mongols burned everything in their path, but Hormuz survived by retreating to the sea. The Portuguese came with cannons and crusader crosses, ruled for 120 years, and were finally crushed. The British came with gunboats and treaties, redrew the map of the Gulf, and then faded away. And now? Now it's American warships patrolling these same waters, watching the same horizon, facing the same brutal question that every empire before them has faced: how do you control a choke point that doesn't want to be controlled? Today, that question is more urgent than ever. The war drums are beating. President Trump has ordered strikes. Iran has vowed retaliation. The Strait of Hormuz, the world's most sensitive valve, is once again at the center of a confrontation that could spiral into a regional inferno. The aircraft carriers are in position. The missiles are on alert. And 20 million barrels of oil hang in the balance every single day. But here's the lesson that 2,400 years of history has etched into the very rocks of this coast. You can bomb a choke point. You can blockade it. You can threaten it. You can unleash the most advanced military the world has ever seen. But you cannot permanently hold it against the will of the people who live on its shores. Geography is not just a map. It's memory. And the people of this region have long memories. They remember the Portuguese. They remember the British. They remember every power that came to dominate and every power that eventually left. They know that empires tire. They know that patience is a weapon. And they know that the strait will still be here when the aircraft carriers have sailed home. The Portuguese learned this lesson. The British learned it too. The question hovering over the Gulf tonight is simple: will the American leadership learn it before it's too late? Or will Hormuz add another empire to its long list of conquerors who came, dominated, and eventually fell? The ships still pass. The oil still flows. For now. But history has a way of reminding us that no one holds the jewel forever. The only thing that endures is the strait itself, eternal, unforgiving, and waiting for the next empire to beat it. Thanks for watching. Share this story. Because if you want to understand the world, stop looking at the capitals and the palaces. Start looking at the choke points. That's where history actually happens. And that's where the future of this war will be decided.